Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to U.S. History Through Film, as we look now at the video worksheet to accompany the movie Red Tails. Number 3, in which they are flying in the skies over Italy in the year 1944, in one of their first actions, is just a little bit questionable. The Red Tails' first real combat action supporting the invasion of Anzio took place in January of 1944, so the very earliest scenes of them in combat must have been set in 1943. That is a fairly minor point. Number 5, the radio hostess is Axis Mary, broadcasting from Berlin. In fact, there were American and British citizens who broadcast for the Germans. The two most famous women working for Germany were both nicknamed Axis Sally. And there was also a Tokyo Rose who broadcast from Japan. Axis Sally and Tokyo Rose and other English-speaking Axis broadcasters mixed popular music with news of Axis victories, Allied defeats, and warnings that soldiers' wives and girlfriends would cheat on them while they were away. And yet, despite all the bad news, they were listened to anyway because they played good music. Number 7, in which the Tuskegee Airmen worry that the use of Negroes will be halted, was a real concern, as many white officers did not want to give black soldiers a chance to succeed. Many thought even if given the chance they would fail and be a waste of resources. And so there were a lot of people looking for an excuse to shut down the Tuskegee experiment, as it was described. Indeed, not all the Tuskegee Airmen got to see combat. There was a unit of black bomber crews trained at Tuskegee who never got to see service, and because their white commander was openly opposed to racial equality. Indeed, some of the white officers in the Tuskegee training program had actually volunteered for it, specifically with the intent of sabotaging it from within. Number 9, they're happy they're at least not mopping latrines in Milwaukee. And the truth is, many black soldiers only got to do menial work. And in the Army, they would work as janitors or as truck drivers or other jobs. It certainly had to be done, but that they were given because white officers didn't want to put them in combat. In the Navy, black sailors typically served as stewards or cooks or janitors as well. Even the Tuskegee Airmen at one point were used to cut the grass. Number 18, we see that Junior, or Ray Gun as he'd like to be called, went to Howard University. And Howard University was one of the first all-black universities founded in the United States, at a time when black students were expected to go to separate universities in general. Although Oberlin College already admitted black students alongside white ones, as well as women alongside men, both pretty radical ideas for the time. Howard University was set up in Washington, D.C., admitting black students, both male and female. One of its founders and one of its early presidents was General Oliver Otis Howard, for whom it's named, a Civil War veteran who is a big supporter of black civil rights. He also founded Lincoln Memorial University in East Tennessee as a memorial to Lincoln, obviously, and also as kind of a reward for the people of Southern Appalachia who had stayed loyal to the Union. In number 24, the Tuskegee Airmen destroy several Messerschmitt 109s, or ME-109s for short, and these were one of the most commonly used German fighter planes during the war. Number 30, we see Lightning visit a club that is only for white officers, and ends up getting a fight with a man who insults him. And this is true to similar events in the actual history of the Tuskegee Airmen and other black men serving in the U.S. military, who are often excluded from clubs and other military facilities on the grounds that they weren't white. Probably the most famous case of this is known as the Freeman Field Mutiny, which was actually a whole series of events at Freeman Army Airfield near Seymour, Indiana, mostly in April of 1945, in which black officers tried to integrate an all-white officers' club. And the so-called mutiny was really a collection of these attempts and resulted in 162 separate arrests of black officers, some of them twice. 3 were court-martialed on relatively minor charges as an excuse to punish them. 1 was convicted. Although 50 years later, in 1995, the Air Force officially vindicated the actions of the black officers, set aside the 1 court-martial conviction, and removed the letters of reprimand that had been put into permanent files of 15 others. Interestingly, one of the lawyers who defended those black officers in 1945 was a man named Thurgood Marshall, a black lawyer working for the NAACP. 9 years later, in 1954, he would be one of the lawyers to argue before the Supreme Court in the case of Brown versus Board of Education, which resulted in the integration of public schools. And then, 13 years after that, in 1967, he became the first black man appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, where he served until the early 1990s. Number 31 mentions the P-51 Mustang, a type of fighter plane that entered service in 1943 as a long-range fighter plane that could accompany bombers on long missions, which was their role in World War II. They were also used in the Korean War, although by that point they were known as F-51s rather than P-51s, such planes now being called fighter planes instead of pursuit planes. The P-51, by the way, by the 1950s was one of the last propeller-driven planes in the U.S. military, at least fighter planes, and was retired in 1953 when jet fighters completely replaced the last propeller-driven fighter planes. Number 51, number 52 describe an attack on a tank factory near Berlin, which was based on or describes an actual mission that took place on March 24th, 1945, in which B-17 bombers and their fighter escorts flew over 1,600 miles to bomb a tank factory in Berlin and fly home. A big Daimler-Benz tank factory, which was defended by Messerschmitt 262 fighters, which was the first jet-powered fighter plane to go into service. The Germans have been working on it for years, at least since 1941, but they only entered service on a large scale in March of 1945. So this would be the first time that Me-262s had really been used much, and they were used in large numbers to fight the bombers involved in this mission. And where number 64 mentions the distinguished unit citation being conferred on the Red Tails, that was for their actions in the mission described in 51 and 52, bombing a tank factory just outside Berlin.